Hey everyone, Emily here and welcome to my kitchen. We're going to be making one of my favorite things to make during the holiday season or really anytime. That's a good recipe for pie, and I'm going to be trying a new one today. This is actually one of my grandma's recipes. I have it here in her recipe book, and it's a recipe for creamy apple pie. It's very similar to a regular crumble top apple pie, but it has a bit of a creamier filling. I'm using some Greek yogurt and eggs in that. Sounds like it's going to come out really good. So let's give it a try and I'll show you how to put this together. We'll get started on this by putting together our crust. Now I'm going to be taking a little shortcut today and I'm using a store-bought crust. Otherwise you can just make a regular single layer pie crust and roll that out into a circle. I'm going to just give my store-bought crust a little roll to fix any cracks that have formed in it when I rolled it out. And I'm going to go ahead and transfer that into a 9-inch pie pan. Once you put the crust in the pie pan, go ahead and press that down and crimp the edges. And then before I crimp the edges, I'm just going to even everything out and cut off any of the excess pie crust. And if you have any holes that have formed in your crust, this is a good way to fill those back in. Take any of the little scraps off the edges and you can just press that in. No one's going to even see it. It's going to be in the bottom covered up with your filling. So you'll notice right here, I don't have enough to crimp, so I'll just put a little piece of my pie crust scrap in there, good as new, and then I can crimp that up. Now there's two ways that you can crimp your pie crust. You can either pinch it with your fingers and it gives it that nice fluted edge, or you can press it in with a fork. And because I don't have a ton of excess crust on the outside, I'm going to press it in with a fork. And I usually prefer to do it this way when I'm not doing a double pie crust, because you just have a little less crust to work with. So you don't get a nice thick crimp with your fingers. So I think this looks better. The pie crust is all taken care of, and now we're gonna move on to our apples. I'm gonna start by peeling and chopping up 3 cups of apples. I think because these apples are so big that I'm only going to need about 4 of them. I'm using Gala apples. These are one of my favorites to use for pie, along with Fuji apples. They have a really nice texture to them. They also have a really good flavor. They're not too sweet. They have a little bit of tartness. Granny Smith apples are another good option to use for pies. Those are some of my favorites. I have 4 large apples all peeled here. This is what I'm going to start with. I have an extra one if I think I need to add it in, but I'm just going to start by chopping these up. It's a little bit different than a regular apple pie recipe where you normally would thinly slice these. This one instructs you to chop it. So I'm going to make fairly small cubes out of these apples. Not too small, you don't want this to disintegrate, but you also want the apples to be able to cook through as you bake this in the oven. So you don't want to have incredibly large chunks. I would say about this size should do it. As I chop these, I'm going to go ahead and just add that into the bottom of my pie crust. That was my 4th apple, and looks like this is going to be the perfect amount. So I ended up using 4 large apples. I would say probably 5 or 6 small to medium apples would do the trick. We have our pie crust all filled up with our chopped apples, and now we're going to get started on the creamy element of this apple pie. That's going to be the remainder of the filling. So into a bowl, I'm going to crack in 2 eggs and beat those up. Give these a whisk. I'll add in 1 cup of granulated white sugar, a teaspoon of vanilla, and a pinch of salt, Give that a mix. And then lastly, I'm going to add in 1 cup of sour cream, or in my case, Greek yogurt. You can substitute Greek yogurt for sour cream. They have a very similar taste and texture, so that makes it an easy substitute when you're baking. And I'll just give this a good mix to combine. Now, if you are substituting in Greek yogurt for the sour cream, make sure you're using plain Greek yogurt. And if you have regular yogurt on hand, that's unfortunately not going to work. It has to be Greek yogurt for a substitute with sour cream so that it's thick enough, or else you're going to have a really watery filling. I have a nice smooth mixture here. I'm going to pour this right over the top of my chopped apples into the pie crust. This looks perfect, and now we're going to work on the crumble top and pop it into the oven. For the crumble top, we're going to make a flour and sugar and butter mixture. I'm going to need about a ½ cup of flour, 1/3 of a cup of packed brown sugar, 1/3 cup of white sugar. Before I add in my butter, I'm going to mix together my sugar and flour. Get this well incorporated. Get rid of any of the chunks of brown sugar that you might have. This will make combining the mixture so much easier. Once you have that mixed together, go ahead and add in a ½ cup of butter. Now, it's important that your butter is still pretty cold when you're making the crumb mixture. That way you end up with a crumb mixture and not a paste. I've chopped up my ½ cup of butter into some smaller cubes. That's just going to make it a lot easier to work with. I like to give this a toss right away. That's going to coat the cubes of butter so they don't stick together. And then I'm just going to cut this in. So press into the butter with a fork, or if you have a pastry cutter, that's going to work well also. So just press that in and keep going until you have a nice coarse crumb mixture. Now, at a certain point, I just give up on the fork and I move on to my hands. You don't want to do this for too long because you don't want to heat up the butter and turn it into more of a paste than a crumb, but this just helps break up those last few little bits and create the texture that we're looking for. So just take your crumb mixture once you have the right texture, and then evenly coat the top of the pie. Now, if you're a fan of cinnamon, this recipe doesn't have any cinnamon in it, but I would say add in about a teaspoon to this crumb mixture on top, and that's going to give you a nice little hint of cinnamon if you really like that with your apple pie. This is all ready for the oven. I'm going to pop this into a 375-degree oven for an hour. After about 20 minutes, I am going to take this out and cover up the edges of the crust with a little bit of foil so that they don't over brown and burn. Otherwise, this is a pretty easy baking process. After an hour, the custard filling should be all set, and we'll let this cool and we'll be ready to serve. The house smells amazing, and this pie has had quite some time to cool off. Still a little bit warm, but I think cool enough that we can slice into it, and it should hold together pretty well. So let's see how it turned out. Well, the first piece never comes out pretty. That's what happened here, but it always tastes just as good. So let's give it a try and see how it turned out. This came out amazing, and it tastes just a little bit different than a traditional apple pie, but generally has a lot of similarities. The creamy filling has a slight tang to it, so it kind of cuts into the sweetness, and it's not an overly sweet pie. I would definitely make this again, and I think it's one of those pies that's definitely going to cut a lot better if you let it cool completely or even chill it. I'll definitely be making this one again, and I hope you try it. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you liked this video, and if you did, don't forget to hit subscribe and the bell icon so you can get notified every time I post. As always, you can find the full recipe to this in the description box down below. If you try out this recipe, let me know how you like it in the comments section or leave a suggestion for my next recipe. You can find links to all of my social media pages and my Amazon page for all my cooking favorites in the description box, and I hope to see you back here next time.